Dirty Harry is one of Clint Eastwood's most iconic roles, remembered for his hard-edged attitude and grisly one-liners. Today we'll discuss the original 70s film, including its themes, visual style, and of course the character of Dirty Harry himself. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me, as always, which is a weird thing to say in episode 1, but welcome, David.
Now I know what you're thinking. Has this guy ever been in any reviews before? I tell you in all this hubbub, I think I've forgotten myself, but yes, I have. Hi, how's it going?
Welcome. This is our new show. This is episode 1 of a brand new format in which we will be reviewing movies, not too dissimilar to other movie review shows that you'll find on Male Fuzz Movies from myself and the other co-hosts, but the gimmick with this one is that we're going to work through either franchises or pick a theme, where we pick maybe an actor or director or some sort of subgenre, maybe something funnier, but we'll work through in batches, almost as if it's in like mini seasons. So our first season is going to be Dirty Harry. We're going to work through the 5 Dirty Harry movies, 1 episode per movie, and talk about them. There'll be a bonus episode on Patreon over at patreon.com/MaleFuzzTV of a related movie. In this case, it'll be another Clint Eastwood movie. And that's the basic premise. And the whole goal of it is to obviously work through the movies and review them and discuss them, have some fun, as you do, but is to assess which one should make the shelf, right? You know, the idea of the Collector's Cut is that if you're a movie collector, while you're still doing physical movies or you're collecting digitally, what's the point, or not even the point that you say stop, because some franchises come back and have better entries again later, but which ones are worth watching, which ones are actually worth owning, which ones are avoid at all costs, do not waste your time, money, effort, or sanity.
Which ones are your Terminator and which ones are your Genesis?
Perfect, yes. That's the perfect way to put it. So, and as we go through some different franchises and so on, maybe we'll see, you know, where the trends are, like what franchises fall apart around entry number 3, or how many can make it to double digits should they go that far.
Ugh.
So we are going to start this journey with Dirty Harry, because some of the franchises we do will probably be quite stupid. We wanted to start with a real movie that people know and, you know, respect. So Dirty Harry, directed by Siegel, 1971, was it? Yes, 1971. Yeah, so we'll start spoiler free, as we always will do, and we'll give you warning before we dive into the most spoilery territory stuff. I guess the first question I'll ask David is, had you ever seen Dirty Harry before?
I had not. Dirty Harry was a something. I mean, everyone knows the line about, you know, the 44 Magnum. Everyone knows that. But beyond that, no, I have been unaware of Dirty Harry and his antics in the San Francisco Police Department. So this was a fresh view for me, and I mean, without getting too much into it, I wasn't disappointed. So definitely a interesting movie in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's funny, I brought up IMDb, I noticed that technically it's got an X rating.
I know, which it's so weird.
Yeah, I guess it was seen as very risque at the time for a number of reasons, and we'll maybe talk about why that is. I have seen these before, but I've only seen them once before. I bought a DVD box set back when I was a teenager and watched them then, so it's been a long time. I remembered a few key moments and shots that were really distinctive in my head, but I had forgotten a lot of what the ins and outs and the going-ons of the movie were. I vaguely remembered a sniper. I vaguely remembered like a shot of Dirty Harry standing on a bridge, which is a big moment near the end of the film.
Oh, yeah.
But like, I couldn't have told you a lot about the premise. And in fact, the weird thing about watching this, again, having seen them before but forgetting most of them, is that I don't really understand how the sequels exist because of the way this movie actually wraps up. So that's something we'll talk about in spoilers.
Yep.
So we'll get into all that.
Right.
And what the arc of Harry's character is. But yeah, obviously Clint Eastwood playing Harry himself. Yes. I think the biggest shock anyone finds who watches this now, if they've never seen it, is that there's 2 famous Dirty Harry quotes, and only one of them's in this movie. The other one is in, like, I think it's the 4th movie, which is the Go Ahead, Make My Day.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that was Dirty Harry, honestly.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What surprised me the most in this movie is that, without getting into specifically where they were, the famous line in this one is actually said twice.
It is, yeah.
That caught me off guard. I was like, the first time they said it, I'm like, wow, that's really early in the movie. But I guess that's why it stuck with people. It's like the first cool thing that Harry said. But then it got repeated later on. I'm like, oh. So he just practices this in the mirror. He just does this.
Yeah, it's actually used to set. It's like a setup and payoff where they set it up the first time and then it's paid off later on with I'll just say a different result, shall we say?
Yes.
And it's like, yeah, okay, that's kind of fun. And maybe they knew they were on a cool moment. They had a cool line and they weren't afraid to use it.
I think they just had an ad deal with the 44 Magnum producers, because nothing sells it better than that.
Is 44 Magnum like a specific brand, or I assumed?
I think Magnum is. I'm
really?
not a gun nut. I have no idea.
I have no idea. I assumed like different makers would make 44 Magnum. I assumed that was just a size and type, and then different.
Yeah, 44 is definitely the size. It's 44, but I don't know about maker of the gun. Yeah. Comment below if you're more intelligent than us.
Or don't. That's fine. Only comment if you're dumber than us, so that we'll feel superior and can enjoy that privilege.
We will be removing every comment that does not have a spelling error.
All right, so yeah, the basic premise of Dirty Harry is that there is a killer on the loose in San Francisco, who is a sniper who's killed someone one day, sends in a ransom demand, and says that if he doesn't get his money, he will kill someone else the next day. Honestly, it's very old school Joker when I think about it.
It's honestly the Zodiac killer. Like, straight down to, he's in San Francisco and he's taunting the police and he's sending notes and all that. It's just Zodiac over again. I
mean, I don't remember exactly when the Zodiac killings happened, but I want to say it is before this. So this,
yes,
yeah. So probably an influence on it. And you can kind of look at Dirty Harry as a character who's kind of this like fantasy character who's like, you know what, he's going to do what it takes and like screw the bureaucratic tape of, you know, like maybe the frustration of not catching the Zodiac killers, what led to the birth of Dirty Harry as a character. Like, this is what we all want to happen. There's someone just be like, throw the badge away and say, no, I'm going to get him no matter what. I'm going to play my own rules. Yeah,
I do wonder how. I mean, I'm not super familiar with any of the like early 60s, 70s movies in the like cop genre, or, you know, the kind of, but I know that it's a meme. It's a commonly used trope of, you know, oh, he's a cop who lives on the edge and doesn't play by the rules.
Loose cannon,
exactly. And I'm just wondering how set in stone that was when Dirty Harry came out. Was this one of the first movies that really like said like, no, here's how you do it, here's the proper way to do that? Or was this one that's like, yeah, no, we've had like 50 cops on the edge?
I want to say Dirty Harry made what you're thinking of the thing. Like, I'm sure there's noirs that kind of, you know, delve into it a little bit and but
I mean, ever since like the 40s, there's always been the drinking detectives who were kicked off the force or whatever.
But I think in the specific, he can't catch the bad guy until he's not really a cop anymore. I think that trope. I think what you're describing. I think Dirty Harry may have started that and made that a thing. And sure enough, like it's such a trope now that you kind of cheer for it. You're like, oh, they're going to have to hand in their badge so they can go after the killer. That's how they'll catch them. You know, it's this thrown away the rule book kind of idea. I was curious to get into this actually about how, because last time I saw this as a teenager, and when I was a teenager I wasn't thinking politically about anything, but I was curious watching this now as an adult with a bit more sort of set in stone political views, like how I would sort of view the character of Dirty Harry and the system that he's rebelling against and what his attitude is, because, you know, the subject of, you know, police harassment and brutality comes up, and as Harry do, and it's hard to like be mad at him necessarily because he's going after this vicious killer who's murdering people and children and all sorts. So it's like, you know, it's definitely poking at some hard questions about how we deal with people like that.
Yes, it's very much ends justify the means sort of character.
Yeah,
especially with this particular thing where it's so clearly black and white of, no, he is an evil man doing evil things. Scorpio, by the way, I don't think we've said.
That's the killer, yeah.
Scorpio is such an evil man doing evil things that no matter how you end up getting him.
Of course he's inspired by his name's Scorpio.
Yeah, exactly. But no matter how you go about getting him, it's going to be justified in the end because you are stopping this evil from existing.
Yeah.
So no matter what, I mean, it's the perfect thing to set Harry against. If it were something more along the lines of like, I don't know, a domestic violence or something like that, and Harry showed up, where it isn't as clean cut as like who's in the right, who's in the wrong, like which side is to be believed or anything like that, I don't think Harry would work. I don't think you would, as a character, root for him because you'd be like, are you sure you want to do that? Are you positive that's the right choice there? But it's only, I think everything that Harry comes against in this movie is so cut and dry, black and white of here's the right thing to do. And then the bureaucracy's telling him like, no, Harry, you can't do it like that. And he's like, screw it. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely one or two times he makes a choice where I'm like, technically you're wrong here. Like, technically, yeah. I can't really agree with this course of action.
That technically is the bureaucracy talk.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting because, you know, I don't want to, obviously one of the few things you've done prior to this is we did a 3-hour discussion of the Batman earlier this year. And I don't want to just bring up Batman every time. But there is actually a bit of a comparison to make here and about a character working outside the rules to take down the villainous criminal. And this, you know, Scorpio is this unhinged lunatic who's doing a lot of awful things. And there's definitely something by the end of the film. Obviously, Dirty Harry is a lot more willing to just shoot people in the face as a character, which is very different from Batman. But the idea of like ultimately having to like let go of the shackles of the system to like do ultimately the morally right thing to take this guy down is definitely part of the story. So we can get into that. I mean, it sounds like you enjoyed the film. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say I enjoyed the film in the most general sense. I don't want to get too specific with what I actually did enjoy until we get closer to the spoiler section, or at least getting through it. But I did definitely enjoy the film in the sense of it did things that I didn't think a film would have done back then. Because looking at it as, okay, here's Clint Eastwood and he wants to do, you know, this dirty cop movie, whatever he wants to do about it. They put a lot of effort into things that I don't think that many studios would have done. Like, in terms of, like, the guy's a sniper. Scorpio's a sniper. And there are multiple shots in this from the perspective of, like, helicopters flying around San Francisco. And they could have easily have just taken a shot from the rooftops of San Francisco and given that vantage point. But they're like, no, the police are going around in helicopters. We're going to go about and show this entire thing. There's no need to put in that much effort, but they did. And one that got me later on in the movie is there's a scene at a football field. And they do a pole camera basically right up against Harry all the way out via, I'm assuming, another helicopter shot. Completely unnecessary, but it really sells the moment.
It's one of the best shots in the movie, so I would...
Yeah.
Like, when it comes to art, necessary and what makes it what it is are two very different things.
Yes.
You know, so I think there's a lot of good cinematography in this movie. It's got a lot of gritty shots. There's a lot of scenes where it's not afraid to let the characters just be covered in darkness in certain scenes. There's a scene where Harry is talking to like a suicide jumper, and it's just like a little side tangent almost in the movie to give you a bit of Harry's character. But when he goes up in the cherry picker, which is what I'd call that. I don't know if Americans have a different name for it.
No, yeah, that's basically what I got.
Yeah. Like he goes up in this cherry picker, and by the time he gets up there, because they're above where all the lights are, because it's nighttime. Like there's so much darkness that there's just this like really eerie mood to it almost when he's up there talking to this guy who's like on the edge of the building. Yeah. That it's just like, oh, there's a really distinct look to this, and it's one of my favorite things about the movie is how it feels and looks, which I think is one of its strengths. Because I do think there's actually a couple of things in it that feel a bit silly and feel a bit contrived. The big famous, you know, monologue he has about the 5 shots, 6 shots, you know, do you feel lucky, punk? It's a very quotable line. I will say his delivery of it the first time catches me off guard because it doesn't sound like that cool the way he says it the first time, but the second time he says it is the inflection that people use when they quote it, right?
Yeah.
I feel like people show the clip of it. They always show the clip of the first time, but it's the second time that people are actually mimicking when they're doing the impression.
Yeah,
it absolutely is.
That first time is what made me think like, no, he just practices this in the mirror. He just does this.
But that scene is like, it's this random thing where he just kind of like suspects there might be like a bank robbery happening, and it just sort of like breaks out, and he has to put down his hot dog and go deal with it. It's actually a really silly, contrived, like, just as he's getting his lunch, there's a bank robbery happening with like armed gunmen coming out.
I mean, it's even sillier than that, is that the entire time that he's opening fire on these armed gunmen, he's still chewing his hot dog. His mouth is full. And
he's walking down the street, and they do technically like try to shoot him first, but it does kind of feel like he is so trigger happy to just pull the gun out and start blasting. Like,
absolutely.
You know, it's the Frank from It's Always Sunny like meme. So anyway, I started blasting. Like, it really is that.
Yeah.
So that those elements feel very of its time, and I can appreciate it in that context. It's the sort of thing that if a modern movie did this exact scene, unless it was going for like a parody or some kind of like, you know, satire on it, I would probably critique it and say this feels off. But this feels a bit more earnest here because it's coming from this different time period where it feels more genuine and more like this is just like this was cutting edge at the time to have him do this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was. You were talking earlier about the feel of the movie, and one thing that really stuck out to me during that suicide jumper scene is that the city, I feel like it's something that got lost over time, where, you know, things with everyone who's on set needs to be like insured and they all need to be covered by the company or whatever like that. I don't know if that was the case in this movie, but it felt like San Francisco was so full. Like it felt like there were people there everywhere. Where I feel like most modern movies, it almost feels a little bit sanitized in that, like, yeah, no, there's a group of people walking by in the background, but it's not like this. The suicide jumper scene, there is a crowd, not just a couple of onlookers. There is like a full block's worth of people all standing around looking at this guy. And I can't remember the last time I think anyone would have shelled out that much of just human cattle pretty much to fill in that scene. And again, it served no story purpose that there needed to be that many people around, but it just made the city feel that much more busy and that much more alive than I feel like most cities do nowadays. Yeah,
you get the feeling when there's shots of him walking down the street and crossing the road and there's pedestrians and stuff, it does kind of feel like, and this may not be true, maybe they're just really doing a good job of recreating it, but it almost just feels like, oh, they did this guerrilla style where they just shot him walking down the street with no people directing traffic, and he just had to make his way through. So it really feels like he's having to find his way through a busy city, as opposed to, oh, it's perfectly timed and he's walking on. And part of that might be, when you've got big crowd scenes like that, you just let randomers like come up and be part, because they're so far down there, you're not going to see anyone do anything that's going to ruin the scene. Right. So it's okay, but yeah, maybe there is some truth to that. I don't know. Like the scene that makes me think of, probably because it's from the 70s as well, is the scene in Superman with the helicopter, with all the crowds down at the bottom and they're looking up. Maybe it's just because like this was a time when you had to get extras if you wanted people. So movies were used to doing a lot of extras, assuming they are all extras. Whereas today, maybe there's this attitude of, oh, if you want people in the background, we can put them in the CG. But then when they get to post, like, oh, there's no time or money for that now. Let's just leave it. This is fine. We'll just, the dozen people's enough kind of thing.
I feel like what it usually is that they have the establishing shot with a bunch of people. They have this setup where it's like, oh, yes, no, this is a busy restaurant, but we're sitting in the back, so we're not actually going to see anybody.
Yes.
But don't worry, it's a busy restaurant over there.
And that's just one of those little things. It's not a big deal, but it's one of the things between... Well, it's like a gauge of production value in a weird way, because if you can show it more often, if you can make it feel more alive, then that's a sign that there was more money, or at least more detail and attention spent to those particular things.
Right.
That, it does. It feels like a living city. It feels like the city itself is almost a character in this. And it's not a movie that's constantly talking about the city as if it is a character, because some movies do that, and some... Yeah. And it's neither good nor bad, it's just if it works for the movie, it can work. Here, the city feels like a character, despite the fact that it's never really talked about in that way. they mention it a few times, but I think the reason why it feels like a place, other than it just feeling alive with a lot of extras and a lot of locations, is that it does go to kind of notable places. We spend a lot of time on rooftops looking down at parks. We spend a lot of time at a football stadium. We spend time at like a quarry, I think, towards the end, and there's parts of the highway. You get a feel for a lot of different areas in the city, so it feels like a fully living, breathing world as opposed to...
it's not all of the chase scenes happen in the warehouse district.
Yes.
Not all of the fight scenes happen in the quarry district. It's very varied, where you get this whole feel of... Honestly, that was my concern just starting up the movie. It starts very quickly, very suddenly, with Scorpio looking through his sniper at a woman who's swimming on the rooftop. And this was literally... Like, he knew that this was the only vantage point to get to this woman, and he set this all up so that the police would get to his note. Like, it was all planned in advance. But I was very worried before they got to that point, because it was very much okay, we're on top of this incredibly tall building, looking down at this other tall building that has nothing around it. And it felt very on sets, I guess I would say. It felt like it was just kind of built for the purpose of getting that scene. And I thought, is that going to be a thing that we're going to be doing the whole movie, where it's like, now we're in the police department and you're not going to see anything except for like this 3 walls and the desk. But then as soon as the scene ended, we immediately saw Harry walking through the city, going from the one building over to the other.
That's my favorite part. That's my favorite part of that, is that you get the whole thought process where he goes up to the crime scene where the pool is, and he's looking at the body and stuff, and then he's looking around like, okay, where could this have come from? And he sees the one tall building it could be. So it plays into the crime scene that there is this one taller building. It's the only place it could be the vantage point. So we were talking earlier about him walking through the pedestrians, walking across. Like this is where I was talking about it. He's walking, and at first you think, well, where's he going? Where's he going? And then he walks up, and you realize, he's went to the building where the shooter must have been, and he sees the shell casing, and he sees the note ultimately pinned on the thing. So, yeah, that's great. I love that element.
Yeah.
And it's something to bring up later on in the film as well, is like, well, he likes using rooftops, but, most rooftops are going to be locked. You can't just walk up to any rooftop that you want.
Yeah.
Only certain buildings are going to be accessible for whatever reason. So, so they played with it. They used that as one of the thinking devices as the movie goes on. So, yeah.
So I think shortly after that, they find the note. The guy wants a ransom. I think it's $100,000. And
which seems quite low in today's money for this type of ransom. But yeah,
that's the Austin Powers gag. Dr. Evil gets out and he's like, "Well, what's a good amount? I don't."
Was it 100? Well, $1 million at least.
But he says otherwise he'll keep on killing. And then Harry, I can't remember exactly how we get from the next scene, but basically he gets a partner, and it is I think it's Chico Gonzalez is the name, and he's like a completely new detective, and Harry is not at all happy about that. So I think that having if I don't know if this was ever planned to be a franchise or whether or not they were just Dirty Harry and then they made more.
I doubt it was planned as a franchise, would be my guess.
Fair enough. But I think that it did a fantastic job introducing Chico as basically the audience stand-in character, where it made it a believable thing of like, no, you're partnered with this new guy, and he's not asking questions about like the procedure of things. He's not asking questions about how we do police work.
He's still trained. He's still a cop.
Yeah. He's only asking questions about the social aspects, like why do they call you Dirty Harry, and why this, why that. They're just asking about the world and the characters rather than the, well, what do you mean Miranda rights? So yeah, no, even mentioned that he's from this area as well, so he's not even asking about the city or anything like that. It's purely just Harry. It's purely just who he's working with that he's asking about. Right.
So no,
I will say I don't know how appropriate it was. It makes sense, I think, for the police, but they are very openly racist.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Extremely openly racist.
Well, I think it's interesting because they casually throw around some racial terms at one point when they're talking about it, but they're kind of doing it in this jokey way. when they're sort of joking about why Harry's called Dirty Harry, and it's like, oh, he hates everyone. Then they list a bunch of like basically races, but with words that I'm not going to repeat.
Yeah.
But there's a really interesting moment because the Scorpio's like first note, his threat at the end of it, it's not just that he's going to kill someone tomorrow. He says maybe tomorrow I'll kill a Catholic priest, or I'll say black person, but you can put in.
He didn't say that.
Yeah. But there's a great moment in that scene where it's like the police chief is reading it, or maybe it's the mayor that's reading it, and he gets to that last word and he just kind of like doesn't say it and moves on, and it kind of feels like to me that between that scene where the mayor's feeling awkward and consciously saying I'm not going to say that, but then you see Harry and the cops openly use those words. It really feels like it's pointing out kind of like where the society is right now as the movie's being made, where I know like a lot of people are trying to make a conscious effort to improve that side of things, but clearly there's a lot of, you know, down the totem pole people who are still just throwing it around like it's no tomorrow.
Yeah. I mean, someone in a public office like the mayor is obviously going to care more about the image than some cops hanging out in their own back room. So.
Absolutely, yeah. Which, you know, it's interesting because I think I don't know if this plays this way in 71 when it comes out, but to a modern audience, I think most people are like, oh, that's interesting. Harry just said something kind of racist, because now you're going to have to work a little harder to make me kind of root for him. Like that's an off-putting quality to the modern audience.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly think the entire first act. It's hard to tell where the act delineates here, but the entire first act of just learning about Harry, we are given nothing to actually like about him. Like, he's not a good guy in anything we've seen him do. He's very, as we've said, very trigger happy, very openly racist, not sociable in any regard. The only thing that gets us, and I think that it's been a term that's been thrown around a lot, especially in television nowadays, is the competence of him. In the same way that, like, you know, Breaking Bad, like House of Cards, those shows are about people who are horrible people, but are so competent at what they do, you can't help but root for them. And I feel that Dirty Harry's in the same sort of way of, he saw that robbery coming with just a car idling outside a bank. That's how you are, as an audience, looking at him and being like, okay, I trust him to do whatever he wants to do then, because he clearly knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the very first thing I said about Harry as a character, is that I think ultimately he has this kind of wish fulfillment of, and you could look at this as, you know, like, I think the problematic side you could look at this from is the idea of, like, oh, you want to give police more power to just do what they want and be, you know, reckless and like, obviously I don't want that. And that's why I got into this. I was thinking, oh, am I going to feel weird about some of this, you know, with a modern lens, and now that I've grown up a bit and I'm thinking about these things a bit more. But when I look at this movie, it does kind of feel like this wish fulfillment thing. It's like, okay, this guy he's after, Scorpio, is so bad, he's so deranged, and we're seeing all these awful things he's doing and how the system is failing to kind of deal with him. And part of that's Harry's fault at one point, to be honest. But, you know,
absolutely.
We'll talk about that. But ultimately, like, it doesn't matter. At a certain point, there's some people so bad that all of the rules don't matter, and that you just have to stop them because it's worth saving the people that are in danger more so than it is justice, right? Who cares if he walks free or you have to kill him if it's going to save the lives of innocent people who are in danger, right? Especially if it's children, which, you know, at a certain point it's going to be in this movie. So it's like, okay, this is kind of the wish fulfillment of, like, just dealing with it, and that there's someone out there who can do it, right? Which is why I do think the comparison to Batman is slightly there. Like, there is a kind of a slight element of that to the character. And, you know, Clint Eastwood obviously has got a lot of charisma. You know, he's a movie star. He feels like a movie star. The way he walks, the way he talks. He always commands the screen and he's always got this presence there. All of those things make it easy to be engaged whilst watching him, even if you don't necessarily like him as a person, you know, the character that is. Like, even if you're having some, well, you know, I don't know if I necessarily agree with this attitude or like what he's doing. So, and I imagine that a modern audience does find more things to dislike about Harry as a character and the choices he makes versus at the time. But I still think the fundamentals of what the movie is still works, because ultimately it is still this fantasy of, like, oh, there's someone who can do what needs to be done to take down this really horrific person, because no one is going to watch this and think, oh yeah, Scorpio, like, we should respect his rights here. He needs to.
But I mean, they specifically make that point about how, I mean, that's getting into close to spoilers, but there is a point in this movie where they do straight up talk about, like, what rights does he have still as a person, and Harry's just like, he's killed people. This is not a discussion.
Yeah. So yeah, there's debates to have there, and we'll probably go into that a bit deeper as we talk about the specifics. So, but yeah, now cinematography is great. I really want to shout that out. I think it's just probably the biggest star of the movie for me is the cinematography. I think the plot is the one thing I do remember about the sequels is that none of them have as good a plot or villain as the first one, because the first one has such this really focused, specific idea. There's this madman who's killing people, and he's very brutal. He's very childish in some ways as well. When you actually sort of see a bit more of him later in the film, it's like, oh no, he's not this cold, calculating. That's where he's maybe different from what you think, at least what you think of the Zodiac. Like, he feels like he's a bit more gleeful in some of his little actions and the way he is. Yeah. So
I mean, as you said, Joker is a apt comparison. It is someone who's very much unhinged, but is still, he's not bitter, really. He's more so just like, nope, this is just what I choose to do today. I rolled out of bed and chose violence.
Yes. So all that stuff works really well. Performances from these actors are, obviously, Eastwood is Eastwood, and he's very dependable in this type of role. There's no denying that. I think the guy playing Scorpio is also pretty good in the role.
Yeah, I think that it was weird to me because they didn't even hide him. Like, they showed him up on the roof there in that very first shot, and they showed his full face and everything like that. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess it isn't a mystery to the audience then of who this guy is. Like, we're not going to have that scene where, Harry unknowingly sits down next to him.
Yeah, they have like maybe like a couple of seconds of mystery, because it starts off with just like I think the first shot of him, technically he's looking at the barrel of the gun, so he's like, you see kind of his hair out of focus, like sort of in the background. But yeah, you see his face quite quickly, and it's like, no, this is not about like who it is. Like the point of it, his name's not important. That's really not the purpose here, And
I mean, even then, he was never named. He was only ever called Scorpio. They never said Scorpio, aka Brian. They were just like, no, it's just Scorpio.
Yeah. Did they ever find out his name? Maybe they didn't, but like
no. If they did, they never gave it to us.
Yeah, they never mentioned it to the audience. Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So no, good stuff. Yeah, I mean, other than that, all the other characters I think are big enough to warrant too much of a discussion. They're all fine in their roles. Yeah,
no, I mean, there was the only scene that I would want to bring up in terms of characterization is, I think it's his lieutenant. I certainly thought that the beginning of the movie, the lieutenant was kind of giving Harry a hard time about how he did a certain case back then. I think it was something about a rapist or something like that. Yeah. And how he handled the case. But then as the movie went on, the lieutenant is very obviously on Harry's side. Like, he's on the side of wanting to catch Scorpio. He's not the guy sitting there going like, give me your badge. You clearly are too emotionally involved in this. He's like, no, like, go out, do the job right. At one point later in the movie, when they have to give Scorpio some money, Harry says, hey, I'll be the bag man. And he outwardly shows his lieutenant, like, hey, I'm bringing along a weapon, even though he said not to. And then after everything is said and done, the lieutenant's like, this is all going to come down on me. And Harry's like, no, it's not. Like, just blame me. Whatever. Who cares?
To continue with the Batman comparison, he's kind of like his Gordon in that he's part of the system. He's like this middleman who ultimately thinks that Harry needs to exist, but he has to try and enforce some of the rules from up above. But he sees him strapping the switchblade to his leg, and he sort of has this sad moment where he's like, it's a shame that it's sad that a cop has to be like skilled in a weapon like that. It shouldn't have to be that way, kind of thing. And it felt like it's an interesting beat there from him, and kind of this middle management almost role between Harry and like the mayor and the commissioner and the higher ups. Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned the scene early on when they bring up this old case where the mayor says to him, maybe at this point I'll just say spoilers because I'm going to start talking about specifics here. So
yeah, why not?
So full spoilers for Dirty Harry from this point on. So yeah, that scene early on where he's in the mayor's office and Harry immediately shows his character, basically making it very clear that he feels like he's been wasting his time because he's been in the waiting room for the mayor for like 2 hours. He's like, this is wasting the time. You want me to solve the case and catch the bad guy? Like you're making me wait in your goddamn office. But he brings up this case. The mayor says, "I don't want any trouble. Like you did that thing last year," and as through the dialogue, we find out that he shot a rapist who was chasing a woman down an alleyway with intent to rape, and the mayor says something to the effect of like, "Well, how did you know that's what his intent was? You can't shoot someone because you believe they intend to do something," and he says, "Well." He was naked, holding a knife, and he had a hard-on. So I made some deductions, and I think this is again going back to the idea of the movie. Is that the movie? Well, it's in a very gritty world. It's making it very black and white because I think you hear those details and you go, oh, and it even plays it almost like a comedy beat because it cuts back to the mayor at the end of the scene and he goes, you know what? I think he's got a point, and it cuts to the next scene. And it does play like almost like a laugh at the end of the scene where the mayor's like, oh, you know what, he may be right. maybe he should have taken him out.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that it's kind of like saying sometimes the bad guy is just the bad guy and like the system is at fault, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, if we're getting into full spoilers now, I think that's kind of the point of the movie is this is such a clear delineation of this guy is bad. He is evil. And Harry's job, as he sees it, is to stop that guy via whatever means necessary. Like, no matter what, protect people from getting hurt again. And the whole reason that the movie exists, I think, is A, have a good standoff of good versus evil, obviously, but B, by the time we hit the end, Harry has had to go through the ringer in every regard, like physically, mentally, because someone died because theoretically he wasn't fast enough, even though even he believed she was dead beforehand. But
which by the way is also very Joker. The person you were trying to save was already dead in the trunk somewhere, kind of thing. Absolutely.
But no, then by the end, all the bureaucracy that has gotten in the way and has basically gotten to this point telling him, no, you can't do that. He's able to go, is basically just enforcing Harry's viewpoint of this black and white morality, where if the bureaucracy is saying that he gets to go, that makes the bureaucracy an enabler of this evil, and therefore it also has to go. That's the reason why at the end he takes off his badge, he throws it away, because he's like, I cannot do good in a system that will permit evil.
Yeah, and that feels like the arc of the movie is he chooses to take that badge off and he throws it away, and because he realizes the only way he was able to stop this guy is because he basically has a frankly my dear I don't give a damn when he's talking to the mayor towards the end, when this big like final sort of like circumstance comes up and he's killed the bad guy and he looks at the badge and he's like, yeah, like ultimately I'm not a cop, because what a cop is not what I am. I am someone who stops these bad guys no matter what, and clearly that's not what being a police officer really is. Which is why I think it's really weird, because the movie opens with this dedication to fallen police officers in San Francisco, and I assume these are real names. It sort of like does like a sort of camera tilt down these names in the years that they passed away, like basically from the start of the century up until like, I don't know, 40 something, and it's like, there's like maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 a year police officers in the city that died on duty. And I think it's interesting to end that movie that starts with that dedication with, no, this character had to give that up because it was a hindrance on stopping something bad. And I think, well, it is a bit of wish fantasy. I don't think the movie's saying that we have to have characters in the real world like this. I think it's trying to provoke the question of, when is the system in the way of actually protecting people, as opposed to,
I mean, I think that that makes it all the more sensible as to why there is that dedication, because out of anyone, if you are in the police, I'm assuming they hate dealing with the bureaucracy more than anyone else. They would, as long as they are, actually good cops, they want to catch the bad guys.
Which
they
is
want to.
sadly a big if. You know, like
Yes,
there's a reason why there has to
exactly.
be rules for police and why they should be enforced. But you know,
Absolutely.
that's another debate.
But I mean, we get into that in the entire middle of the movie. Is we after they talk to some random guy and just like, hey, have you seen this guy? He's like, yeah, he's literally right over there. And I'm just like, oh, okay, cool, let's go. So they go in without a warrant. They end up basically brutalizing him because they're trying to get the location of this girl that he supposedly has hostage.
Yeah, Harry shoots him in the leg to stop him from running, and comes over. And it's this big thing, you know, it's like because the floodlights come on in the stadium and the big camera shot that you mentioned where the camera pulls back and Harry's like standing over him kind of victorious, but it feels like there's a bit of a bitterness to it because you sort of realize this can't be the ending.
See, you say that, but I felt like this movie, that's why I had trouble breaking down the 3-act structure to it. I felt like this movie was about to end like 4 times.
Really?
Like the first time they were like chasing the guy down, they had the helicopter find him on top of the roof. And I was like, oh, okay. So we have like a positive identification. This should end up very quickly then. And then the movie kept going.
Yeah, but that was like 30 minutes in. There's no way it was ending then.
I definitely, that's why I was so confused. I was like, is this like just the first guy and then it leads to a second guy? Where are we going with this? But then after that, we had the football scene. And that felt like, you know, we had Harry get knocked down and out. We had the guy get shot in the leg. He's begging for his life. It has that huge cinematic shot pulling out. And I'm like, that feels like an end of like we're about to go into the denouement. Like we're just going to take it down of like, we caught the guy. But then they go into the whole thing of like, no, you broke like all the laws we have in terms of getting somebody dead to rights. Like you were just going to bring him in dead.
Like you ruined the evidence because you went into this like little habitat he's got without a warrant. So that rifle that we can match to the gun that killed people doesn't matter because you didn't do it the right way. So we have to let him walk. And because I think the reason why it does feel like an ending is because to Harry it is. To Harry he's just, I mean, he's not found the girl yet necessarily yet, but it's kind of.
Before they had that scene, they show them pulling the dead girl out of the ground. Like they had that showing that he was too late to get to her.
No, I think that was after the football stadium scene.
It was after the football stadium, but it was before the talk with.
Oh, sure, no, I mean in the football stadium scene, it feels like an ending for Harry.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
So,
you know, like the camera pulls back and then it's sort of all pulled away from him because, like he's going to have to go for all these reasons and. I don't think the DA and the judge that are explaining this to him are being unreasonable or being villainous or antagonistic in how they're saying it. It's like, no, these are the simple rules of how we function. Mm-hmm. You can't just do this, you know?
I know that, I don't know exactly when it happened, but there was a thing in Shawshank Redemption where when they were arresting a character, because I'm not going to spoil any of that. When they're arresting a character, they specifically show one of the officers holding a card with the Miranda rights on it, saying you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney, because they were so new at that point that like officers didn't just have it memorized. And I don't know exactly when it was instituted and when everybody had to do it and whatnot, but I do feel like that was the sort of thing that like during this period, during like 60s era, that's probably around the time period where it's like, no, like there are certain rules here that you have to do to bring people in. Like you can't just, obviously warrants have always been a thing, but in terms of like, no, they have rights and they need to know their rights and they always have these rights. And that's where Harry comes in being like, I have the opinion that he forfeited that when he killed multiple people.
Yeah, it's obviously the justice system needs to exist in some form. There has to be trials, there has to be juries, because we have to, like, you know, people can sometimes be mistakenly arrested, like you get false accusations, things like that. But obviously by this point in the movie, like, Harry knows this guy is guilty of what he's doing. Like, this is the guy. You know,
absolutely.
This is the guy in the ski mask that kicked him while he was down, because he knows that, and he knows that for a fact because he stabbed him in the leg, and this guy's got a stab wound in that spot in the leg. Like, the amount of coincidences that would need to happen for this to be an innocent, like, second person would be absurd. So he knows who it is. He knows he's found the guy. And it becomes this question of like, and there's so many like cop shows and movies, talk about, okay, we all know it's this guy now, but now we have to like prove it. Now we have to find the right evidence to put them away and deal with it that way. And it is this thing where Scorpio's released, and well, the first thing he actually does is go and pays a guy to beat him up so that he can...
I was hoping you were going to bring that up. That was part I was like, what?
Yeah, he can claim police brutality. But what I was going to say is that quite quickly after that, he immediately starts finding victims again and finding even more, like, it's like there's some really, like, and I say good in the sense that it's effective, moments of violence in this movie where he's like chatting to this guy in like a liquor store and he just like smashes the bottle over his head before he robs him. And it just like it feels so unhinged and deranged the way he just kind of casually does it. Really effective. And then the fact that he, the big finale section of the movie is that he kidnaps a bunch of kids on a school bus, and he kidnaps the bus driver is this woman that he's holding a gun to and saying drive, and he tries to do a ransom demand again. And this is the big thing that ultimately prompts Harry to be like, screw your rules, I'm going to go and get this prick right now because this is like too much is on the line. This whole like final section, like. There's a moment where the kids don't know they're in danger at first and they're singing along, and this guy's like, yeah, let's all sing songs together. But then one kid sort of questions, where are we going? We're going somewhere funny. Like, I kind of want to just go to my mum now. And Scorpio immediately just snaps and punches the kid in the face. And I'm like, okay, all right. If you want to sell me this character's unhinged and it needs to be stopped, I mean, that was a pretty good way of showing it.
Yeah, I mean, we keep on making that comparison to Joker, but it really is... I think that's what sells Scorpio as an interesting character, is that it is genuinely impossible to tell whether or not he is flying by the seat of his pants or if he has all this planned out. Because, like, that whole liquor store robbery part, that seems like the sort of thing where he was just standing outside and he was like, yeah, this could probably work, and then he just did it. Like, he just walked in, made a short conversation, then bashed the guy and walked out after stealing the guy's gun. But then, in terms of the being beaten up in order to frame Harry for even more police brutality, like, that's something that required thought and planning and being able to go through an intense amount of pain in order just to do this thing. It was very... well thought out. It was very meticulously planned to make sure that, like, no, there are reporters here, and I'm going to tell the reporters this name specifically.
Yeah, which is
the one cop who can do anything won't actually be able to do anything.
Yeah, it's so that they'll go hard on Harry to like back off, and it gives him a bit of free rein, and then that's when he does the liquor store thing. I would argue the liquor store thing, well, it feels random, I do think there's a purpose to it. I think the whole point of it was to steal the guy's gun, because he goes in and says, that's obviously the purpose, but I'm saying that it didn't feel planned. It felt like he needed a gun, so he immediately just did the first thing that came to mind where he was going to get a gun. Yeah, but he needs a gun because he wants to do his hostage thing. So, and obviously the bus thing is fairly well thought out. I mean, maybe not as thought out as some of the earlier stuff where he had all this plan. Because, when he does the first big ransom thing, where he's got... Because at first they don't pay him after he's killed someone, so he kills a second. That's when they like catch him on a roof. And because he can't kill the first person he was going to kill, which I think was a gay guy, just from the body language and the way that he was kind of with the other guy.
Yes.
And it's San Francisco as well, which I know is like, the Harvey Milk kind of like era and whatever, but so yeah, I mean, he's already proven himself racist from the first note, so it's not a shock to find that he's probably also homophobic, which I think this was implying as well. But he's also kind of bitter because when he gets caught and he has to run away here, he runs and goes to like a black neighborhood and just kills a kid. Like, they find that body like the next day, so it's like, okay, he's petty as well. Like, if he doesn't get his way, he's going to act like a child and just do whatever he wants to. And that's kind of, and it's probably more interesting because, much like the Joker, we do not get a backstory. They do not discover who he is, what his origin is. Is he like a vet who's got PTSD? Is he someone who was like tortured as a child by an abusive parent? Is he, whatever the reasons you might want to like put in that gives him his trauma? Yeah, none of that. It's just a mystery. He's a product of this world, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, because that is counterproductive to what the movie is doing. Again, it's going for this black and white, very clearly evil. As soon as you give any sort of humanizing anything to the character, it immediately allows you to be like, okay, well, I kind of get why he's doing this, even if I don't agree with it. I understand, from a bad childhood or PTSD or whatever like that. It's the reason that, if you viewed the movie Rambo from solely the police officer's perspective, he's just a mass killer. But it's only because we see the other side, and I guess not Rambo, whatever the first one actually was. First Blood, yeah. That's right.
It's on the list.
It's only because we see his side of things that we're like, okay, but like, no, we get it. We understand why Rambo became Rambo. For this movie, that would be counterproductive, because as soon as you start humanizing this evil, that's when you start questioning whether or not Harry is actually doing the right thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. So yeah, Harry volunteers to be the money guy when these first killings haven't worked. He kidnaps a 14-year-old girl, which, by the way, when they pulled out her naked dead body, I know the actress is probably older, but it weirded me out that they told me she was 14, and then there's a full frontal of this body coming out. I'm like, Jesus. Yeah. It definitely sold the horror of it, though. I really was like, okay, all right, this is disturbing, and suitably so. But Harry volunteers to be this money guy, and this is meticulously planned, because the Scorpio killer calls him on a public phone booth, and Harry has to then race to another public phone booth somewhere else in the city. It's somewhere he could get to on foot, but he's getting a bit out of breath between each run, and the whole idea is that he's making sure he's not being followed by other police. That's what he's trying to ascertain. Now his new partner is following him, because they've got a prehistoric, comms wire that he's listening to the phone call. So he's driving independently to each of these locations. But all of this is very planned out, and it's a really interesting sequence where, Harry at one point, 3 guys try to mug him, on the way to one of the places, and he has to pull out his gun and make it clear that he's not to be messed with. But there is this risk, what if they steal the money? He's got 100 or 200 grand, I think it is at this point, in this yellow bag, and if he gets outnumbered...
honestly, this, not only that scene, but on either side of that, there's a scene where I think it's immediately after that, actually, he's trying to run to the phone booth, and because of this mugging, he's been held up long enough that there's just an old guy next to the phone booth who answers the phone first. And it's one of the rules that Scorpio laid out was, if someone else answers the phone, we're done. The girl dies. So this guy picks up, and Scorpio's like, who was that? And it's some old guy. I've never seen him before. Phone goes dead. He hangs up, and you think oh crap, that's it. But then it's obvious Scorpio enjoys the game. So he calls back and tells him okay, I'll give you another shot, and tells him the next place to go. But by the end, they also make it to the park, and that's the final place that they want to go. And feeding back into that, this feels like a city that has just other things going on. There's other things. There's just a couple there who's making out in the park. Harry makes note of him. It's just all right, I'm still going up. And then this random guy comes up, says that his name is Alice, and I guess is propositioning him. And then he just says... yeah,
I'm glad you brought this up, because I think I forgot. Even though I just watched the movie literally before we started, I think I'd forgotten about this. I was he gets propositioned by a guy, and when Harry says whatever he says, the guy goes, "Oh, you're not Vice, are you? I'd kill myself." And I'm like, whoa, this went really dark. Because... it's hard to say what the movie's trying to say about society here, where everyone he runs into is somehow getting in the way of saving this girl, when obviously independently it's not really any of their fault, because they don't know what they're interfering with, that they're getting away. Obviously the muggers are shitheads because they're just trying to mug them, but it does paint a very kind of nasty view of what the world is right now. Is all these people he runs into, even the guy who's going to commit suicide, is kind of paints this weird picture. You get the sense that Harry is this old school guy, which I think this neatly leads into a fairly, what felt like random at the time, although now that we're talking about the themes, maybe we can kind of place it. There's a fairly random scene. It's when they think they're going to catch him going back to the same roof that they caught him on the first time, and they're waiting and they're watching, and as they're waiting, Harry starts looking elsewhere, and he notices in a window there was a woman in her underwear, right? A young woman in her underwear. And then, you know, it's the 70s, so yeah, we have to get full bush. She comes back out and she's fully naked at the window. But she answers the door, and there's a couple who were down the street before who are at the door now. It's a man and a woman coming in, and she's answering the door, the woman in the apartment, butt-ass naked. And they immediately just start taking off the scarves and whatever. And it's like, okay, I'm sure this is probably implying they're about to have a threesome, or, you know, that's where it's going. Yeah. And I almost wonder if, like, the movie's telling me here that between running into, like, the gay prostitute, between all these other things that it's bringing up, if it's sort of saying, like, Harry's kind of from an older world that is more black and white, and he doesn't quite understand where the world's going. Because when he sees this, it's not like he's titillated. He goes, "Oh, look at these hanky panky, you know, thruple or whatever you might say." Yeah. He it just kind of looks, you know, disgruntled by it.
Yeah, like when it was just the one girl, like, he was keeping an eye on it, like, he was enjoying the show. But then as soon as the other ones came in, he's like, "The hell is this? Like, what is going on here? All right." And then it gets into the whole firefight part. But yeah, I do think you're right in that he comes from an older world. He is someone who he sees these things that back when, you know, 50s, even early 60s, would have been so deeply frowned upon, or so possibly even illegal a lot of times, that have been made more culturally accepted due to the 60s just massive culture change. It is something that I think they were trying to get across, that yes, things like Harry sees all these complicated things and he wants to just boil them down into good, bad. Like, he wants to be able to do, like, this is bad, this is good, this is whatever. But he knows that the only things that he really cares about, the only thing, because if he cared about all that, he'd go insane. The reason that he's so distant, I guess, the reason that he seems so much of a dick, is that he honestly just has to brush all that off. He doesn't care about the lesser evils. He only cares about, you know, he's in homicide. He's in the, like, what would be considered the worst of the worst in terms of crimes. He only cares about when that happens. When he gets propositioned in the park, he just tells the guy to basically leave. Like, he doesn't care. Yeah. And even though that it could potentially, I don't know the laws at the time, but that could potentially have been something that got him arrested by any other cop. But he's like, no, there's more important things going on. So despite the fact that he may not like it, he doesn't approve of it, but he just doesn't care to stop it either. He's just jaded in that way.
So I guess
that's the way I saw it.
Yeah, I guess in a weird way, you could say that the movie is kind of this, I would say, conservative viewpoint, but like it's a viewpoint of, like, the old timers sort of, like, examining their place in a world where they think things used to be simpler. And maybe the ending, I mean, we've already read it as he's thrown away the badge because he's accepting that he doesn't fit into the system. But maybe if you look at it through this lens, it's the same thing effectively. He's accepting that he isn't fit in the world anymore, and that's why he's throwing the badge away. Is that he can't fit in this world, so he has to walk away from it. And I think that thematic ending, whether or not you want to look at it from the lens of him not fitting in the world or him not fitting in the police system anymore, that's why I said earlier, right at the start, I was like, how is there sequels where he's a cop? Because this doesn't make sense. I feel like the end of this story is that he can't be a cop anymore.
Honestly, this just feels like, we keep on making the superhero things. This feels like how he put on the mask.
Yeah.
This feels like how he's like, no, I have to work outside the system.
Yeah. And I'm sure some people read this fantasy and actually say, yeah, we need people like this in the real world. You know, hard, tough men who'll stop the bad guys. Yeah. And there's a lot of reasons why that's, you know, unrealistic and childish and, you know, various other things. But in the context of a movie where you're looking at it as an allegory, and you're looking at it as a movie character and what it's saying about the world, you know, as a character who doesn't seem to fit into the world that exists anymore, in a weird way, and he does come off as kind of unlikable in a lot of ways because of that at times.
I mean, not to harp on it for too long, but going back to the suicide jumper, it seemed like he recognized, like, okay, this guy's trying to kill himself. And I can't quite place whether he was being totally serious about it. But when he got up there, the only thing he was saying to the guy was like, I hate the cleanup. Like, you guys who jump, you know, you make it all a big thing, and then we just got to clean it up afterwards, and it's always a pain in the ass to identify you after the fact. So can I just have your wallet so we can get that over with early? And it does seem like the sort of thing where, you know, these, obviously there have been suicide jumpers for years or whatever, but it does seem like a sort of thing where he's just so jaded by it. He's so like, no, if you're actually gonna kill yourself, then just do it in the privacy of your own home, sort of thing, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have to be this whole big production. But he somehow manages to turn that into him saving the guy's life. Which, by the way, I just want to go on record here. Sending Harry Callahan up there to get a suicide jumper down may be the worst decision the police department has ever made.
It made me think so much of Lethal Weapon, because it's the same thing in that. They send up Martin Riggs, and he's also got some crazy ways to deal with the situation. So
yeah,
and he's different because he's a suicidal cop versus, you know, Harry, who's this, you know, hard-edged, cynical asshole. But
yeah,
I think, and you could also argue that he just knows so much what he's doing that by minimizing the spectacle that this guy's going to create by doing the suicide, that it's actually going to take away some of the appeal for him. So it could be a tactical, measured thing that he's doing. But then, like you say, you can also read it as, no, he really just doesn't give a shit, and he's just being very cold and frank with him.
Why not both?
Yeah, it could be both, yeah. So, no, it's kind of frustrating. It's funny, because Clint Eastwood, because, you know, he's still around now, and he's so old now, that he has felt like this crotchety old man who has, like, older views that don't quite fit with the world anymore. I'm not sure how true that was when he made this, but...
I mean, clearly it's to some extent, but like one other scene just to really drive home the point. They're going around town because after they saw the guy on the roof, they said like, oh, he has this color bag, a tan bag, I think it is. And they're driving around town and they find a guy who has a tan bag, and they follow him back to his home. And Harry goes and basically tries to peek into the window to see who this guy is, what he has the bag for. Inside is the guy, but also a woman who I believe is topless the whole time. I have her name here. Hold on. Hot Mary. That's it.
Now, she does start off with a top on. The reason why she takes off her top is because when the guy opens the case, it turns out this bag instead is just filled with clothes, and she's going to try on the clothes, presumably.
Gotcha. But regardless, as he's peeping into this place, a bunch of guys come up and start roughing him up because he's peeping into this woman's house, and they consider him like to be that. But Harry, you know, his partner comes up, says, hey, you guys are assaulting an officer, you're under arrest. And Harry tells him, no, let him go. And I think that goes back to that old school morality of these guys were doing the right thing they believed was right. Yeah. So he's just like, no, like, let him go. They're on the side of good here. Even if they were mistaken, they're on the side of good.
Which, I mean, arguably that might be one of the first things that he does, or choices that he makes, where you kind of, like, you know, start to like him a bit, because, you know, 'cause fundamentally, like, he realizes how it looked, him peeping in on the window, right, from their perspective. But he does, you know, he says, no, like, they're doing the right thing. If I were them, I probably would do the same thing if I caught someone doing this. So you let them go. It doesn't matter that I'm technically a cop and they punch me. Like, it's fine. You know, it sets up that there is some fundamental morals in there that you can side with, even if you know, they fall apart, and if you put them into a real world context and start to, you know, break them down. But, it's it turns out to be quite a fascinating character study, and I suppose in a weird way. And maybe, you know, we're talking about him representing, like, older ideas, older values, not necessarily bad values. You know, the idea of, like, wanting to catch bad guys and protect the vulnerable and the innocent. Like, there's nothing wrong with those elements. Like, people are never going to disagree with those ideals. But how like the way to do that is changed, you know, in time.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that this movie does exist purely out of the post-Vietnam era, where prior to that, like, you know, there was this American exceptionalism of, we go into a war, we fight the right side, and we win. And then post-Vietnam, you know, it was a war nobody wanted, it was a war we lost, it was a war that may not have been justified in the first place. That's what shakes up the black and white morality of when Harry came from and makes it a more shade of gray in a world where he doesn't belong anymore. Where are we doing the right thing isn't a question that he ever would have considered before.
That is a very interesting point to bring up. I would argue that maybe the appeal of the character at the time was that audiences wanted a character who it was just clear right and wrong. And like, because, you know, this is 1971, it's right at the end of the Vietnam War, give or take.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. Like the appeal of this at the time might have been, here's a clear villain, here's the clear hero, you want to see the hero succeed. Because, yeah, the Vietnam War was kind of the first war that was so, you know, publicly available through media that people had opinions, and a lot of people see it as like an unjust war, and a lot of Americans specifically saw it as, we're the bad guys here, we shouldn't be doing this, stop this.
So just for context, Vietnam War ended in 75, so this was still ongoing at the time.
Wait, all the way to 75?
It said Fall of Saigon happened in 1975, which was the mark of the end of the war. So yes.
I would have sworn it was like 72.
Same, definitely, but regardless.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Fair enough. All right.
But no, I mean, that those feelings were still ongoing, even if the war hadn't ended.
Yeah, sure, for sure. Yeah.
Those feelings of uncertainty about like what is right, what is wrong. To have that character come in and be like, no, this is crystal clear, the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do, and what characters should be rooted for in that discussion.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe you could say that it's not even necessarily trying to long for things to be simpler again. It's just trying to make it clear that there's some things that we can still maybe agree on, even in this more complex world, that perhaps we should, you know, consider. Yeah, I think the time period absolutely plays into a lot of what this movie is.
I mean, I do want to point out just one little wardrobe choice. I don't know how intentional it was, but pretty much every time that Scorpio's on screen, he's wearing a belt buckle that is the peace symbol. So for that to be diametrically opposed, you know, the hippie peace symbol to Clint Eastwood's character of a more conservative view, I feel like that speaks volumes to itself.
It does, yeah. It's especially because he gets damaged at one point after he's been beat up or whatever, and it's kind of like, you know, it's just like half bent and you know, so it's this misshapen towards the end of the movie. That's an interesting detail to think about, and like trying to tie the villain to the peace side of like the political movement is a bit of an odd, you know, thing to look at in a present day context, I think.
Well, I don't think that he actually believes in it. I mean, that's my own personal. I don't think he actually believes in it, but I think from a viewpoint of, you know, the morals and like where everybody's ethics line up here, it would be the thing that I think that the change of the 60s is probably what Harry's biggest enemy is. It's the change that brought that around, where not everything was so black and white anymore. There was a lot more gray area to what people were doing, and compared to the way that he was brought up. So
yeah, that's fair. Yeah, rather than the Scorpio killer representing certain people, it's more about what that symbol means to Harry, right, instead. Fascinating stuff. There's a lot of good set pieces in here as far as just like 10 sequences. You know, obviously the Harry going from phone to phone in the middle with the money is really well done, and then ultimately going back to to look for him and find him at the football field. A lot of great big epic shots. The big kind of like, you know, final set pieces of the film with the school bus leading to the quarry is, you know, Harry, like, and it's a really epic movie moment. Like I think it's probably the most cinematic moment of the whole movie is Scorpio's on the bus and he's holding a gun up to the bus driver, and the kids are all scared, and he's like happy because the mayor's told him on the phone, like, you're getting what you want, there's a jet waiting for you, there's going to be all this money, like we're buckling, we're bending over and giving you everything you want because we can't have any more dead kids. And he's driving down, he's going off the off-ramp at the highway, and as they're going down this off-ramp, there's like a sort of like small bridge going over the road, and just as he turns, at first he's really small, but you can just tell from the pose that it's Harry. You can just from the distance that it's Harry, and he's just standing there with his sunglasses on like a badass, just waiting. And the way Scorpio reacts to this, and again, I need to go, but this is the thing, we keep comparing Scorpio to the Joker. I don't think he's like Joker from this time period. I think he's a more modern Joker.
Oh yeah,
it's worth mentioning. But like the way he reacts and gets upset and like takes the wheel and tries to swerve, or and he's looking out for him, and Harry obviously action moment, he jumps on the top of the bus and we get like a a stunt sequence, which is quite impressive looking, and leads to a chase in this quarry, which ends up at the little lake or whatever it is by the quarry where the final shootout happens, and that's where he repeats the line. He's like, he's shot at him a number of times, and he's like, well, 5 shots or 6 shots. Obviously, early on in the film, when he does it to the bank robber, it turns out it was 6 shots and he had none left, and the bank robber's actually quite pissed because he's like, I got to know, man. Like, I've got to know if you had one left, because he chose not to reach for his gun so that Harry wouldn't have to shoot him. But then Harry just points at him and pulls the trigger, and it's click, it's empty. At the end, Scorpio does not make that choice. He reaches for his gun, and Harry, he does have that one last bullet, and it kills him into the water.
Which I really, now that I knew that he was going to give that line again, I really wanted to go back, because I swear to God, he fired like 12 shots. There were so many shots fired at that point.
I'll be honest, I forgot he was going to say it again at the end, because I wasn't counting. The first, because when the first scene was coming up, I knew this was the 5 or 6 shots thing. So I was paying attention and I was counting. Technically there is a 6th shot, but I don't think it's Harry's. Like, because you don't necessarily see him every time you hear a gunshot. Right. I think there's at least enough margin for error that it was, well, it turned out to be 6 actually. So. Yeah. If you're counting, I think you can count 6 in there, and it's like, okay, it's fine. Yeah. But no, big set piece at the end is really great. Like, it feels like Scorpio. His time is numbered now that Harry's off the leash. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, he's coming for him now, and there's nothing that's going to stop him.
Harry is in the office as they're saying, we're giving him whatever he wants.
Yeah.
And he immediately says, stop playing his game. Like, this is never going to end if you keep playing his game. And Mayor objects, obviously, there are kids on the line. But then Harry just walks out of the office. I feel like every time Harry leaves the office, he's like, one-liner, and then leaves. But regardless, he leaves the office, and then you don't see him again, and they do an extended scene on the bus at that point. That's the point where, like, he yells at the kids, he tells them, keep singing, whatever like that. He does the whole thing. So it's probably a good 2 to 3 minutes before you get that shot of Harry on the bridge, just waiting for it, and you're like, oh, this is what he was planning. And then you get the whole thing. It's just a nice little build-up of, like, we know Harry's about to go do something, we just don't know what it is yet.
It's a very epic entrance, and it's definitely, I think when I first saw this movie, it really surprised me how big the ending felt. Like, I wasn't expected to feel like this battle for the soul of the city, like hunting down this killer who's killing kids, and like Harry
How many Dark Knight references do you think we could stuff into this video?
Oh, so many. So many. It lends itself so much to the comparisons, because we are dealing with good and evil, and we're dealing with like talking about all these different things. And one of the other things that I wanted to bring up, especially in relationships to talking about Harry, not really belonging in this world anymore, and this being this divide where the younger people are different. When he first meets his new partner, Chico, he's like, "Oh, you're a college graduate. You've got a degree. You're a college educated person." And that's actually kind of a running trope as well. Is that you have like the begriddled old couple going, "Oh, we've got this guy with a degree who's studied criminology,
sociology."
You've done book learning. I've actually been out in the streets, earning my stripes, blah blah. Right, but he has, it's not too heavy, but he has that little bit of attitude of like, "Oh, you're a college guy. Okay, we'll make it work." But he does treat him well enough. Like, once they're on the job, like, he shows some resistance to working with him. But once he's told he has to, he's not a dick to him. He still just kind of works with him, and it's fine. There's a scene though, so when they're at the park and he's getting beat up, Chico comes in and takes some shots at Scorpio, and he gets shot. Right, Chico takes a hit or two and goes down, and there's one more scene with him later on. We hear that he's okay. He's in a hospital. He's going to be fine, and after some healing. But there's a scene where Harry goes to visit him, and Chico's wife or girlfriend is there as well.
I believe it's wife. Yeah.
And Chico says that he's not sure if he's going to come back, because Harry's like, oh, when you come back, like I've said, hey, you can make him my permanent partner, which shows that he's bonded a little bit, and he's like, oh, you know what? He took a bullet for trying to help me. Like, I'm going to trust him now. He's earned his respect in a really kind of old school way, I suppose. But Chico says, I don't know if I'm going to. Like, I actually have enough qualifications to go down the teaching route. Maybe I could become a teacher and just, do that instead. And Harry didn't really respond to it at first, but when he gets downstairs with the wife after they've left, this,
I think it's just a hospital, but it does seem more like a spa sort of.
It looked like like a rehab or like a fancy rehab center or something where he was hanging out. But they get downstairs and he's talking to the wife, and she's talking about how it's, like, I think part of his decision is on me because, like, I don't know if I can be a cop's wife, this worrying and, what might happen to him and all this. And Harry does eventually say, if he is thinking of leaving, like he gets it, and then, like, it's maybe not for him. Like, maybe he's better than being part of this life. He doesn't deserve to, I can't remember what the exact line was, but he says something of an understanding nature about it. And I almost, like, see this, like, tying into what we've been saying about how, he realizes that this young guy, Chico, is part of this new world that's not his. And he's like, he maybe shouldn't be in here. And obviously by the end, he's, like, giving up the system and saying that he can't be part of it at all. So maybe you could argue that Chico should be the one who's, like, the driving force in the new police that's maybe going to tackle things differently. But, I do think that, like, acknowledgement from him and not looking down on him for wanting to maybe, like, leave this life is, again, another sign of understanding that Harry is learning, like, how perhaps out of touch he is with certain things.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one part that they specifically say during that conversation is talking about Harry's wife herself, and how she ended up dying of a drunk driving accident. Someone just smashed into her and she died. Like, nothing too big on it, but it was just how she ended up
I like
dying.
that it was a random... it wasn't like someone, like, was taking revenge on him or anything. It was just a random accident,
Yeah, right up until you get to Dirty Harry 7 or whatever, and it turns out the drunk driver was actually Scorpio's brother. But yeah, no, it's very much a random thing, but he specifically says that she never really got used to it either. She was never used to being a cop's wife to begin with. So I, again, can't remember exactly how the conversation goes, but the end line is basically the wife asking, so why are you still a cop? Like, if you're okay with Chico leaving, if you're okay with, your wife was never okay with it, why are you still a cop? And he straight up says, like, I don't have a good answer. Like, it's just what I'm good at. It's just what I do. It's what I've always done, and it's what I'll continue to do. So I think that plays a lot more into the ending as well. Like, he's seen this job literally take out a bright-eyed newcomer on his watch. He's seen the change in the world. He's seen all this. And then on top of it, he's seen how bureaucracy holds him back. Like, there is no reason for him to be around anymore. And I think that conversation with Chico and his wife may have been one of the instigating factors where he is like, no, this is there. I forgot that there is a way out besides me dying.
Yeah, I think I like that the character has to really wrestle with that question, and because he doesn't have an answer when he's asked this, I think it's more interesting and a more unique choice that instead of the partner dying for him to learn this lesson, it's actually almost a little more powerful that he lives but has just chosen to, like, get out. Like he's made a choice, and it is, as you say, it's taken away the spark from, like, at the start of the movie he was, relatively enthusiastic, he was excited to be a cop, and that's been taken from him. It's just gone. That light's been snuffed out. But he still gets to live. He still gets to go on, and maybe that's the whole point, is that Harry sees that there is a way out, and maybe he can too perhaps move on to something else.
Because, I mean, I'm not sure we even said this, but the reason that he's called Dirty Harry is that he takes all the dirtier jobs. He takes all the jobs that... And I feel like you really look at the list of jobs, he's just like, yeah, no, I'll do it. They are dangerous jobs. They are things that are putting his life at risk very clearly. There aren't things that evolve into that. Like, he is very clearly... He volunteers to be the bag man for a serial killer.
Yeah, and maybe my comparison to Martin Riggs and Lethal Weapon wasn't even as far-fetched as I originally thought it was. Maybe he is taking these jobs because he doesn't care if he lives or dies. Maybe that is because his wife died. Maybe he's lost that sense of humanity. Maybe that's also why he's kind of a prick.
I'm not so sure that it's whether he lives or dies. I think that he wants off the job, and he just doesn't see any way off the job except for dying.
You can almost look at it another way though. Like, he does provide this service where he can be the one to take these jobs so other people don't have to. It kind of makes him this valuable guy to have around in that sense. So in a weird way, him being chased off by the end from that life, like, does leave a hole that perhaps maybe it does need to be left. Maybe things have to evolve, and Harry just can't be a part of the new. It's a shame there's sequels, because I think the sequels making him a cop again and like going through the tropes, and they're probably, some of them are probably entertaining in their own right, but
yeah,
I'm pretty sure none of them are going to like come close to this first film, because this first film feels like it has a lot to say, or at least a lot of questions to provoke on us. So even if we disagree with some of the messages the film may have tried to have at the time, all the questions that it's putting forth are fascinating to talk about, and definitely get you thinking about the themes, about the character, and about what it's saying about the system and society and morality and, you know, all these different things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is definitely, there's a reason that this movie started as a single film, presumably, and then evolved into this larger franchise. It hit a chord with how clearly it got its message across, with how well it hit and resonated with an audience of, we all are feeling this sort of uneasiness, and there is just this desire for a clear cut, no, this is good, this is evil. So yeah, I think once he leaves the Force, it is impossible to really get back that clear cutness. So anything that goes beyond this point now is going to be more and more shades of gray, and either it's going to be movies about how Harry adapts to that, or it's going to be basically trying to apply black and white morality to things that as an audience we don't agree with as being as black and white. So,
or maybe the simplest answer is that they'll effectively just undo the arc and just have him be a cop again, so they can keep.
Oh yeah, I mean, probably
doing typical detective-y, gruff stories.
But I mean, how do you explain that then to the character? Because as soon as, if they were to do the scene where he throws the badge and then it went on for another 5 minutes of, him trying to find a life outside of it or something like that, and ends up finding whatever, I could believe he would come back to the Force. But when you end it, when your final shot is him throwing away the badge,
that's your dramatic point. Roll. That's your...
Exactly. Yeah, that's the one that has to stay.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, maybe they'll do the thing where it's like, oh no, he's just here as some help. He's an outside...
Which is kind of like a Mad Max style trope. Like that's kind of what Mad Max started to do after the first movies. Like, he's just this wanderer who comes in and helps whoever whatever community he comes a part of, or group of people that he ends up being around. He'll end up helping their cause and then move on. He's like this wanderer who just keeps going from thing to thing. Now I don't remember the sequels well enough to really even imply what I think of them. I remember
never seen them, so.
There's at least a couple of partners who do bite it. That's like the only thing I remember. Call that mild spoilers if you want, but we'll find out soon though, because next episode we'll be looking at Magnum Force, which is the second film in the series. So
looking forward to it.
Look out for that. But that was a surprisingly analytical and thematic discussion and character study of a conversation. Not every movie we talk about. In fact, I'm going to guess that even the rest of the movies in this franchise are going to become more normal reviews in which we're talking about all the weird choices that are made, and but when we get a good movie like this, we will break it down and properly dig into it. So hopefully this very analytical conversation is made for a good first episode. I hope it has.
If not, just write it all down and use it as your film class thesis.
Yes. And do me a favor, take a screenshot of like the citation where we're cited, because I just want to know that we're in a university paper somewhere. We could be someone's source. How does that strike you?
That's we made up all of our opinions there. I don't know how much of a reliable source we are, but
hey, all sources are just someone's opinion. Fundamentally. I mean, there's facts to it, but yeah, so they got in the way of things.
Not in today's age.
So, as we leave to rate the movie.
Yes.
So we're going to rate it out of 10, but we also have our own little secondary scale that we're going to apply at the end of this show as well. So first things first, what are you giving the movie out of 10?
Out of 10, I believe, and see, it's the first rating that's always a problem because it sets the tone for every movie later on. But after a lot of thinking, I think I'm going to go ahead and give Dirty Harry an 8.
Yeah?
And I think that there's a reason it's a classic. It's a reason that it has managed to stick around, because God knows how many 70s like dirty cop movies have just been completely forgotten. This one has managed to stand the test of time. It's managed to spawn all these sequels to it. There's something special about this movie. Obviously, it does still have its own problems. That's why it's not 9 or a 10. There are still flaws to it. I would say, I know it's just me personally, apparently, who thought, this movie had like 3 endings to it. And I do, not so much the first one, obviously, but the second one, I did actually have to check the time left on the movie and be like, is this it? Or is this how we end it? And I saw there was still half an hour, and I was like, okay, no, never mind, keep going. But yeah, little flaws like that are enough to get it down those points. But for the most part, I think that if you come at it from not an action movie so much as we've been saying, pretty much a character study, there's a lot more to this movie than just the witty one-liners and the fight scenes. There is a deeper underlying current to this that does make it stand out among all the 70s guy with a gun movies. So
yeah, and I think even without that underlying side to it, like I would say that it's less of an action movie. I know people would jump to that conclusion because it's got an action movie sounding title. You've got Clint Eastwood, you've got, and there are some action sequences to an extent. I would say it's more of a thriller. It's more of a
that's fair.
It's more of a tense thriller. And I would say that surface level thriller plot is also just very entertaining, and like, you're kind of on the edge of your seat. You're enjoying the, will they catch them? There's victims at stake. That stuff works in just a surface level way, but then you've got all this underlying stuff with the character and the social stuff that's kind of baked into it through that character. I think that's very interesting, and I certainly wasn't thinking about this the first time I saw it, so this was a far more enriching viewing. Which is why I like talking about movies. Now, sometimes it's like making fun of the bad ones, but sometimes we get to talk about a good one, and you get to sort of break down why there's more meat in the bone than maybe you think there is to begin with.
Beauty of this show is we can flip-flop between the two of those every week.
And we will. Well, I would hasten to suggest it's going to just be a downward slope until we're done with this franchise, and then it'll maybe spike. Although we've already decided what the second thing is going to be. I don't think it's going to spike that high.
It's a tiny little beep.
We are going to have patrons vote on some of the themes and the franchises. The second theme or franchise has already been picked because we're doing something Christmassy, because the way it's going to work out is it'll be 3 weeks in December, so we've picked a Christmas thing for that. But there'll be votes and things after that. My rating though, I'm either saying the exact same score as you, or I'm bumping it to an 8.5. I would agree it doesn't quite get to the 9. Like I would agree that it just kind of falls short of that. But it's hard for me not to go a little bit above the 8 after the conversation we just had.
That's fair.
Like
I sat and thought about that score for a good hour before our conversation, just to make sure my rating scale would be. So I couldn't let our conversation affect it too much. Sure.
I mean, I love when I come in to a review, and I've done it sometimes with some of the others where I'll come in and I'll think, oh yeah, it was good, it was a 7, and then we'll talk about it and I'll go, you know what? No, that was at least an 8, because like after talking about it, it's become a better movie, and that always feels great when that happens.
Oh yeah.
So. And I wouldn't say it happened that much here, but I do think the conversation has enhanced my appreciation of it. And next time I see it, when that eventually happens, it'll be an even better viewing, because I'll be thinking about all these ideas when I'm watching it now, and I'll pay attention to them more. So, so hopefully we've helped your enjoyment and appreciation of Dirty Harry. We will
Wait, hold on, is it an 8 or an 8.5? You never said.
I'll be nice. I'll say 8.5.
All right, cool.
I'll say 8.5. And the second scale, this one's probably quite easy for this first one. To go with the title of the show, the Collector's Cut, obviously it's a play on the phrase Director's Cut, which is the idea that you're curating, and a director, you're curating your perfect version of the movie and cutting out the scenes you don't need. The Collector's Cut, the idea is that we're curating your collection, where we're saying you don't need this or you do need this, or maybe some things in between. So the scale for this, and this was David's concoction, I'll give him the credit for this.
I'm quirky.
So when I say, David, does it make the cut, which I'm going to do at the end of every episode, he will say one of the following, and then I'll also give one as well, and I'll agree or disagree, I suppose. But a cut above is the highest, adulation, and it's worth mentioning the reason why we still have the 10-point scale here is because you can have a 5 out of 10 that everyone needs to own.
I would, if we're never going to get to it because it's not part of a franchise, but like The Room is very clearly like a 2 or a 3, but you're going to own that.
I mean, I would argue it's even a 1, but but it's a must-have and it's a must-watch. But yes, that's the point. So a cut above is just, you need to have it, unless you just happen to disagree with the majority and don't like it, you need to have it. Then you've got makes the cut, which is worth having, right? Simple.
Yep.
Middle tier is cutting it close. I'll say, you give me 2 options here. I'll say cutting it close is the better of the 2. Which is, kind of middling, like, depending on your taste, you might want it. You might see value in it. Cut from the collection is not worth having. And then finally, the lowest accommodation here is cut your losses.
Okay.
So that is our 5-tier system that we're going to apply in addition to the traditional out of 10 rating. So, David, does Dirty Harry make the cut?
Dirty Harry makes the cut. I wouldn't quite give it a cut above yet, again, because I am a little bit scared of getting that high in the rating scale quite yet. And I didn't quite... While I do think Dirty Harry is a movie that everyone has to see at least once, I think that it's worth watching. In terms of keeping it around, I do think that it is definitely more to taste. For example, I watched it with my girlfriend the other night, just to watch it for the first time. She didn't like it at all. She was not a huge fan of, the guns and all the fighting and whatnot. And that's fair.
Fair enough.
She at least gave it a shot. She saw it through. So I do think it is
here's the real
making
question.
the cut.
I've got a real question.
Yes.
Is she going to watch the sequels with you?
She is not.
Okay.
She has already said that.
I was just curious because it'd be like, she didn't like the first one. What's she going to think of the sequels when she gets to?
Nope. I will be sitting in my office by myself watching those. I guess
that's a shame.
It's all right.
Okay, that's cool. I can't argue with that really. I'm someone who. I like collecting movies and I like having access to movies that I think are worth having. So I guess on my scale, this maybe is a bit more to a cut above in that, unless you actively, because there's always exceptions. I don't like, like most people would say Beetlejuice, for example, but I hate Tim Burton, right? So for me, it's no, kill it with fire. I don't want it anywhere near me. But for most people, it is probably it's a classic. Obviously, you need that in your collection. So I'll go a bit higher. I'll say a cut above. And just to alleviate your fears, you worrying about going too high in the scale, I am pretty confident that we will not be at this end of the scale for at least 2 months.
I don't know, man. I've seen what we're picking next, and without spoiling it, you're right. But
I will be shocked. We'll reveal what the next franchise is when we do the last one of this. So in the Deadpool episode of this, which is the 5th movie, we'll reveal what the Christmas
next
season
franchise is.
The only other thing I'll say is that we've already picked it, so we'll just reveal it. The Patreon bonus episode coming sometime in November, which is loosely tying into Dirty Harry, is The Gauntlet, another Clint Eastwood movie. So look out for that if you're a patron. $3 or up, you'll get access to that sometime by the end of November. When in November, right now, I don't know. We're recording this early October because I'm going on a trip for a week next week. So we're getting a head start. But look forward to that. So yeah, but there you go.
Yeah.
That is the first edition of the collector's cut, and that has been our thoughts on Dirty Harry, which means I will take this time to plead with you. I've already kind of plugged Patreon by explaining the
Do it
bonus,
again.
but
I wasn't listening.
go to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV if you want to support all the content that we do. Get bonus episodes, early access to things, which includes Collector's Cut. You'll get it a day early if you're a patron at the $5 tier up. You can also support us by hitting the super thanks button on YouTube, and you can of course support us for completely free if you can't afford to give us any monies. That's okay. Like, subscribe, comment, ding the bell for notifications, watch the content, share it on Twitter. You can get us on Twitter at ScreamsMidnight, which is the Male Fuzz Movies Twitter, and just generally share us around. Also check links for the Discord and the description and things like that. But there you go. But that about does it. I think I've plugged everything that I need to plug.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Yeah. And I suppose actually if you just discovered this channel based on this, check out the other two movie podcasts. The horror movie podcast is Screams After Midnight. There's over 500 episodes of me and Tim talking about horror movies. And we're over 150 episodes of the Atomic Cinema Experiment, which is myself and Tara talking about sci-fi movies. Which this is the third show. This is the
Surely to become the flagship title.
I'm sure. Yes, I'm
Absolutely.
I'm sure it'll be the flagship's a good word. I'm trying to think of another word for flagship. You already nailed it. Why am I even trying?
That's what I do. I come in, I nail it, I leave.
Are you talking about your sexual escapades, or is this your hobby as a as a carpenter?
Clearly, the carpenter. But also, I just want to put out, I don't think we officially said, but next episode, Magnum Force. This is a weekly podcast, so this will be coming out next week after you watch this.
Yeah, weekly show, nice and simple. But there you go. That is the show. That is Collector's Cut. Thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and I'm at that point where I need an outro line, and I've not thought of one.
Oh God!
So one will settle in time once I've nailed something that I like as the outro for this show. But there's got to be some sort of pun with. Don't land on the cutting room floor or something. I don't know.
Marvelous. Call it.